are now listening to the Good Morning Show on WBOK 1230 AM.
We're back. Welcome back to the Good Morning Show. Alan, the O.T. Thomas, the early bird, man. We want to thank our guests. We want to thank Dr. Silas Lee, man, for kind of breaking down that polling is, if you didn't poll you, it doesn't represent how you feel. If it didn't poll your community. And also, one of the major points I brought out was that how the results from certain communities can be lost in the overall report, depending on what the organization or what the outcome the post is looking for. So thank you, Dr. Lee. And Derwin Button, man, great conversation. Studio B, Wednesday, 6 o'clock. Come on out, man. Public Defender Stories. I'm going to be hosting and facilitating that discussion. You're going to hear some really, really graphic tales about what happens in the lives of people who go through the system. You don't want to miss Defender Dialogues, Wednesday, October the 9th, 6 o'clock at Studio B. We got a great week lined up. Our Meet the Candidate series is going to continue throughout the week. But in the studio right now, I guess I could call him Mr. Justice. As long as I've known him, he's always fought for justice. Reverend Dr. Mr. David Billings, anti-racist training organizer with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And also an author, Deep Denial. Reverend Billings, welcome to the Good Morning Show.
Thank you, Oliver. Glad to be here.
Man, it's good to have you here, man. It's good to see you, and your quest to continue.
Yes.
Justice, I know we were talking, you were listening to the interview with Derwin Button about, I guess you were fighting that fight against the system for quite some time. So it had to be real telling. Is there a side of you that wants to say, I told you so, Then now that people are starting to actually begin to see what injustice has meant?
I guess that is a feeling that many of us have, that we've been saying this for years and it was ignored, but you can't ignore it now.
No, especially with not only the human cost, but for people who don't really care about the human cost, the financial burden that is placed on this country.
It's incredible because we always talk about saving money and fat in the budget, but when it comes to incarceration, we'll spend any amount of money.
Right. Well, your book, Deep Denial, I don't know that anyone could have been more qualified to write that type of book than you.
Well, thank you.
And let me say that its reviews have been great, real profound, and real deep, but also it hurts. In many cases, some of the things that you describe in Deep Denial. This book is about racism, in particular white supremacy. What's your definition? How do you define it? I don't have to tell you you're white.
No. I've been white all my life.
How do you define it?
Well, racism has to do with power. It has to do with structural power. One of the effects of racism is this prejudice or even hatred that might exist between the races, but that's not really the issue. The issue is the control of the institutions.
Right.
And if you're white, you're not taught this. You're taught something totally different. And so deep denial is it becomes a psychological thing at some point. That I think if I say I'm against racism, it's the same as doing anything about it. But in fact, of course, it's not.
So the action has to speak louder than your words.
Absolutely, and that's why we talk about white supremacy as if it were just rednecks or Klan members or haters. Right. But that's not the problem. The Institute likes to say if you floated all of those people off on a barge, racism would still exist.
And African Americans can continue to perpetuate institutions of racism through systems against their own.
Yeah, that was one of the main strategies in my mind that came post civil rights, is that you go from a segregated system to one that is inclusive of people of color, but the purpose of the institution and its impacts are still the same.
When did these When did you first realize this about the system? How old were you? What kind of work were you doing?
I was 16 years old in Macomb, Mississippi, when an uncle of mine was murdered. And given Macomb, Mississippi at that time, it just exploded into racial hatred and violence. And I see that as the turning point in my life, because my kin, when asked by Klan members if we wanted them to do something about this, and one of my uncles said, we're not that kind of family. And I, took a deep breath because I wasn't sure.
Right.
But from that point on, it's been 50 years, tried to be a part of this whole race conversation in the United States.
Well, one of the things that you're known for is trying to stress to people, both whites and blacks, especially people in power, that it's not just about emotion. It's not, that it's so much more deeper than that. Explain that to me.
Well, none of the institutions in the United States that make up our larger systems were founded with people of color in mind, particularly African American people. They weren't a part of the equation. So the same institutions that were created to benefit white people now have people of color in them, but their whole purpose is to, I maintain, to keep white supremacy in place.
So you also describe in your book that it has been systematically built into our history. It's been built into the history, built into the systems. Ken Carter, one of our, I think the first African-American assassin in Louisiana, one of my friends, sent me a book sometime that I read called The Invention of the White Race.
Yes.
This was so, when people rail against conspiracy theorists and when people rail against people who are saying that this stuff is systematic, there's evidence to show that
absolutely.
It absolutely was. It is. It was intentional.
It's just not taught. And we're taught to deny it. One of the interesting things when you talk about race in this country to me is that white people are allowed to be individuals. I don't have to speak for or try to explain whites who go off.
Right. You don't have to explain when another white person does something. Hey, that's just that white person.
That's just that.
Good point.
Where, if you're African American, Native American,
it's all of y'all.
Yeah, we're going to hold all of you accountable.
I want to continue this conversation because it's extremely important. We see it. Wearing the burdens of an entire race, no one's up to that.
No. And that's why when whites collectively are being held accountable for racism, we go into a denial. Not me.
504-260-9265. One of the great human beings of our time, Reverend David Billings, in his book Deep Denial, it's about the history of white supremacy in this country. We have a lot of guests on this show that deal with a lot of issues. We have one of our guests that is quick to say that, when he's in the middle of race discussions, he doesn't want to be told about himself. That, it's the wrong thing for people of color, for black people to walk in a room and tell white folks about themselves. Talk about that type of attitude.
Well, if black folks don't do that, there won't be any discussion at all. Whites are very silent when it comes to racism, and that's one of the ways in which we perpetuate.
Well, he contends that's the worst way to enter into a constructive conversation is to tell me about myself and blame me for the past.
Okay, that is a question that often comes up, but I come down on, I think the more we know and the more we understand the truth of this, the better we are. When you say, well, I don't want to be held, talk about the past. Well, you got to talk about the past.
And then the other part is, don't blame me for what my ancestors did. I'm sick of that.
Well, you might be sick of it, but it's true, and there's not a white person in the United States, even if you just got here, that doesn't benefit for the century-old oppression of black people, Native people. Every one of us.
Wow, we're going to lines right now. 504-2609-265. We're talking to David Billings, man. Fascinating book, Deep Denial, about the history of white supremacy in the United States. It's a must read. Carl, you're on with David Billings.
Oh, how you doing? How you doing, David? I was sitting, and when you said David Billings, I thought about Gloria Furman, my great friend, and she transitioned. Gloria Furman, I met her at Dillard University. But Oliver, it's a problem with that victimization, and he speaks so well is that I've been a social worker almost 30 years, and we ourselves, and we get, and it's just like we are monolithic. We get blamed for everything as a people. But I think Reverend Billings, I think psychologically it takes a toll on individuals day in and day out dealing with racism. And my father taught me early on, you got to be the best, you got to do better, you got to really be ahead of them.
Right. Carl, you raise a profound point, and I think conversations with people like Reverend Billings make your call for a trauma institute even more important. And I think when Reverend Billings talked about how unfair it is, how each African American has to answer for and be responsible for the other 14 or 15 or 20 million in this nation is a burden that no one should have to carry.
Oh, yes, Oliver, you're right.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate you, man. 504-260-9265. How much more unfair can it get? You know, that if I make a mistake, everybody that looks like me.
There's not one systemic outcome that is race neutral. Not one.
None.
Health
Zero.
Care, education, criminal justice, banking,
Zero.
real estate, none.
You believe that?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And this is by design, and the country was built on this unfairness. And that's why, we have to undo racism.
Wow. We're going to go to the lines right now. Lines are lit up right now. Line 2G from the West Bank. You're on with Reverend Billings.
Good morning, Alvin and Reverend Billingsley.
Hey.
Look, I want to say that I think it was a profound statement that the institution was built without you in mind. I reflect back when I hear our eloquent leaders in Congress and Supreme Courts and those such institutions that go and constantly use the framers. We were not in the room when the framers created the Constitution.
That's very true.
So how could you have looked out for me when I was not even a thought in your process?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And, it is wonderful, and I applaud that you had to reflect upon it because it is something that must be done by those who have benefited from the system. The system, you created the machine,
yes.
And we're trying to retrofit into that machine.
Right.
It was amazing. It's amazing to hear somebody who says it with such clarity.
Thank you. Thank you, G. We appreciate you. Reverend Billings?
Well, if you take the lost wages of African American people and the lost lands of Native American people, then you understand how white wealth was built,
right, and
why this nation became the wealthiest nation in the world.
Wow, we can go back to the lines. 504-260-9265. Very deep discussion about one of the most profound books on race in our time, Deep Denial. Reverend David Billings. Line 3, Mr. Solomon, peace. You're on with Reverend Billings.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Solomon.
That's why I always tell my brother Chuck Perkins, time validates the things that I say.
Yes.
As I've been saying for a long time, Oliver, and I'm sure you can attest to it, this system was not designed to give us parity.
Yes.
And like Dr. Cowan, I hope you're listening.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you're listening, Dr. Cowan of the Ethics Board.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, like I said, I break the Europeans into three. 1/3, the Donald Trump people, going to hate you to the grave. The second third, they're not going to hurt you. They're not going to help you. And the third is like the gentleman who's there. They see the wrong that's been done, and they try to do what they can to rectify it. And as I've always said, integration, from my point of view, was the worst thing that could happen to us. Because the further we are in this system, the more we support it. So we're in a peculiar situation.
Interesting.
The bigger your job, the more you support this system that's oppressing you.
Interesting.
And we got to do what we got to do. We got to be the spooks who sat by the door. Other than that, you're just supporting, you're keeping the foot on your neck that you say you want off of it. Thanks for taking my call.
Interesting point. Talk about their ability. You've been around for quite some time. You've been on some good folks, some good black folks, some good white folk in the system. But in many cases, that being gatekeepers is just as much an oppressor as the people who fostered and built these systems.
It was one of the strategies post-civil rights, this tremendous leadership that had emerged in the civil rights movement, not from academia or any of the other things, from the neighborhoods. And that in my opinion, that scared people in the United States, white people. And so we began to bring people of color into the systems and then require them to defend it, and it's been, I won't say it's been effective, but it certainly goes a long way towards that. And, again, this is not taught. For whites particularly, we don't get the true history nor the true setting.
I got to ask you this question, though, because it's when you said it, it's still in my mind, especially now that we've been talking for a few minutes. If your uncle would have said something different, if he would have said, maybe we are that kind of family, you think your life would have been different?
Yes, I do, because
honest answer.
They wouldn't have been that push. Once I heard that, I said, well, we got to do something about this race thing. It's too many people are dying. So at an
early age, it showed you the importance of, even in the white community, the control they have over the thought process about race.
Oh, yes.
And racism.
Yeah, that's why, in the dominant culture, which is white, we try to put racism as just another behavior.
And I asked Reverend Billings a question because when confronted at 16 years old, when confronted by some things that the Klan were trying to do in recruiting his family, his uncle in his presence said, we're not that kind of family. And that had a profound impact on his life till this very day. Had the response been different, you would have been a victim of the things that you fought against.
I couldn't assume otherwise.
We'll go back to the lines right now. Line 1, Brother Cedric. You're on with Reverend Mr. Billings.
Good morning. Good morning. This is Reverend, right?
Yes.
Sir, Reverend, sir, and you're Caucasian.
Yes.
Sir, listen, as a 44-year-old black man, thank you. Thank you. Sometimes it's good just to know that someone who's Caucasian care and understand the conditions, that we are in and that we've been put in, not putting all that's going wrong on other folk, because nowadays some of the stuff is on us. But thank you. And I pray that your mission will be an even greater mission, because it's going to take all of us to get on the same page before we can truly live together as human beings. God bless you.
Thank you. It's got to do your heart good. You've been doing this a long time. When I think about your life and you've been committed to justice, sometimes I want to think that your roses are coming later than they should have. But you don't look at it like that, huh?
You mean recognition?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think that's, part of human nature. You want to be recognized in a good way for what you do. But I've had some great mentors.
Yeah.
And I've been brought along by some of the greats in organizing history. And, I prize that.
Wow, we can go back to the lines right now. Lonnie, you're on with Reverend Billings.
Yes, sir. How y'all doing this morning?
Fine, man.
Hey.
Peace to you.
Good. It's a fact that black people have been brainwashed, man. They've been brainwashed thinking that they are the ones who's the cause of everything that go wrong. Mm-hmm. Okay? And the thing is this. We, as people, have built this nation to, like the gentleman said, to the wealth that they enjoy now. And every immigrant that comes over here is a factor that they sucking all the wealth up that we built. But we are denied any part of the wealth that our ancestors created in this country.
That's right.
Now, the thing is this. Most black people don't realize that they're not the ones who's destroying this country. Because you built this country. And I'm going to give you a fact, and this is a fact for history of this. When the black people got out of slavery, and they could enjoy some of the wealth that they created, rather than paying you the money that will go on the job to keep the country going, you know what they did? They formed unions. Mm-hmm. They formed unions to keep you out of the economic system where that you were doing the work for nothing, but when you had to get paid for it, they shut you out with unions.
That's right.
Wow, thank you.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Lonnie.
Okay, brother. Have a good day.
You have a great week. Validation, you feel vindicated and validated in many cases with your work right now?
Well, in the People's Institute, we've traveled the nation many times, small towns and just everything. And yeah, you feel possible. You got to stay optimistic. You got to feel like that we can undo racism, and you can't let it beat you. Although sometimes it's harder to do that than others.
Your work was 20 years ahead of the conversation.
Yeah, it was.
And as I think about the work from that soup kitchen in the Lower Garden District to fighting and accountability within the system, you were 25 years ahead of your time. Are we headed in the right direction? Is this tension and this national angst that we're going through, is it part of ultimately healing, or are you still really concerned?
I'm really concerned. There's so many indicators that we're regressing, we're falling back. If you just take, you can take any of the systems, and you can see that they have a disparate impact depending on your race. And I think white people know this. You hear white people say, well, that's not my history and I didn't do it. But if you ever get to the point and say, well, you want to be black? Yeah, hell no.
What did Chris Rock say in his stand-up routine, Big and Blacker? He said, there's a white guy in this place who's a janitor. And if I asked him to swap with me, he's going to say, nah, that's all right.
Play this white thing out.
He said, and I'm rich. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. I want to talk about tensions in your own family in many cases, and what those conversations were like, as well as the honesty in growing up in Mississippi and Arkansas. And what are the conversations like amongst white people? Well, we're going to talk about with Reverend Billings after the break. You don't want to miss it, man. Call in 504-260-9265. One of the great humanitarians of our time is in the studio with us after the break.
WBOK 1230 AM, the People's Station. You are now listening to the Good Morning Show on WBOK 1230 AM.
We're back. Welcome back to the Good Morning Show. Oliver O.T. Thomas, the early bird. Yes, indeed, man. Back to our discussion with Reverend David Billings. But as always, man, let's stop the beef before grief. The New Orleans Beef Hotline, man. The New Orleans Peacekeepers. Brother Walter Umrani, man, one of the great men of our time. And the Beef Hotline is designed to offer assistance to any individuals or groups that find themselves involved in conflict, even if the conflict includes relatives. To date, 39 conflicts, over 40 conflicts have been resolved. All mediations are strictly confidential. Law enforcement is not included, and professional mediators are involved. For help, call 504-500-1706. Reverend Billings, even though you heard the right response from your uncle about we're not that kind of family, as you continue to grow and do your work for justice, especially against racism. What impact did it have on you and your own family?
Well, for years, it was very difficult, and it was a great silence. And my father didn't really acknowledge what I was doing, you know.
He'd rather not talk about it.
And my mother was very supportive, and she would say, you know, just be patient, you know, he's going to come around, or something to that effect. And but you know, it was very difficult at times, and I owe one of the People's Institute trainers, Dr. Michael Washington, a real debt, because one time at our national retreat in Waveland, he said, well, you're going to visit your parents after this, right? And I hemmed and hawed, and because I thought he wanted me to say something like, you know, well, my parents kind of racist. He said, wait a minute. You can work with our people all the time, but you can't work with your mother and father? And then he said, you go on home and then come back. And we, you know, that's the best advice, or some of the best advice I ever got.
Well, let's be real candid. This is real talk for real time. And white men, in particular, the reluctance to deal with race, gender discrimination, even class discrimination. What does that stem from in your work?
It stems from, again, the origins of the nation, where the messages we received, if we were white, and especially if we were white and male, was that this country's for you. You made it happen. And
take our country back.
Yeah,
make America great again.
That's what that means. Because, you know, when people say, well, we want our country back, what exactly are you talking about? You know, and what they're talking about, in my opinion, is a time in this country where Jim Crow and segregation was the law of the land. And one thing, if you were white, you were always promised, not by anyone in particular, that your children and grandchildren would would live a different life or a better life than you do. Now, that's not necessarily the case, and there's a lot of anger around it.
Well, we're talking to Reverend David Billings, his book, Deep Denial, The Persistence of White Supremacy in United States History and Life and Book. How important is it that white people, good white people, and I hear this, Malcolm X had this thing about white liberals and enablers. He thought that they were as much a problem as the Klan was, and that their conversations about taking care of people and being nice to people versus giving people the opportunity to take care of themselves. What does David Billings say about that?
Well, that's really what this book, Deep Denial, is about, because I don't think racism is kept in place by poor and oppressed white people. I think it's kept in place by those of us who see ourselves as progressive or liberal or whatever.
Wow.
And don't do anything about it.
Well, real talk for real time. So major white Democratic, liberal, and moderate officials have as much to do with the oppression as conservatives are staunch Republicans.
Absolutely. You know, because you don't see us, you know, whether we're in the classroom at a university or in a boardroom at a corporation. If there are no people of color around, we don't talk about race and racism, even with it standing right in front of us, you know, in terms of our outcomes. So I think that's there's a deep denial about that.
What are some solutions, Reverend Billings? How do we begin to, and let me say this, I think maybe you've renewed my hope in terms of this. A few months ago, I had reached a point where I was sick and tired of talking about race because the conversation wasn't matched with any actions, or it seemed to cause a lot more hurt feelings than anything. But these conversations matched with dealing with the systems is the only way we're going to get to a system of justice.
That's right. And, you know, if you look at the history of this country, when black people organize, the country changes. And that organizing is not always pleasant, and the organizers are always blamed. You take Black Lives Matter. See how quickly the white society, moved to discredit Black Lives Matter. So everything matters. All lives matter. Well, we weren't saying that before. We said it when Black Lives Matter gets on the TV. So solutions, if I had one thing, it would be that white parents and grandparents like myself work with our white children as early as possible. Don't wait until high school or something like that to have these discussions. By that time, they've already internalized a certain superiority. So, there's no one answer. Mm-hmm. I think if universities, I taught as an adjunct for a while in the field of social work in New York City, and even though those graduates were most of them were going to go into communities of color and provide services, there wasn't a course in the catalog that dealt with race. Even though, and the students knew this, and that's why white people aren't as fragile as we are treated. You got to deal
you may get your feelings hurt, but you'll be able to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
504-260-9265. A great discussion with the author of the book Deep Denial, Mr. Reverend David Billings, anti-racist trainer, organizer with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. Deep Denial, the persistence of white supremacy in the United States history and life. New Orleans, this place, 36 years of 32 years of black mayors, a lot of African-American elected officials, first black this, black that, 60+% African-American city. Black people as poor here and as left out and locked up here as any place in the nation.
Absolutely.
How can we have all this African-American leadership in so much disparity?
Because you don't have power.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it goes back to if you get elected to a position or appointed to a job, if you forget how you got there, then you're by yourself and often criticized for not being able to make changes. Ron Chisholm always says you can't elect black people thinking that they're going to be able to do it because it's not a do-right system. And
so even if you have a do-right man, a do-right woman, it's very difficult unless you change the system. It's impossible unless you change the system. Yeah. We're going to go to the lines right now. Line 1, Coleman. Honk, you're on with David Billings.
Good morning, nephew, and your guest, and thanks for taking my call.
Okay.
You made an important statement about we spend too much time talking about problems without talking about solutions. And one of the solutions to racism is that all families need to discuss racism with their children early.
That's right.
Race relationships should be taught on, 4 levels: elementary, middle, senior high, and college. It'll give the person who may have missed it along the way a way of reevaluating how they feel about something. And with approaching the problem, that's the solution to it, because it's out there, and I'm going to just say some white and even some black. When you don't succeed in life, you want to blame the other race for your lack of success. And those kind of folks have a tendency to gravitate towards each other and create these organizations. Because right now, we, or some of us, are practicing racial divide rather than practicing racial harmony. I have spent quite a bit of time traveling, and there are a lot of integrated families, and like we say, just say in the neighborhood, once you go black, you can't go back. And I'm going to say integration marriage is really a popularity anything else, you're following your heart, how you feel about that person, regardless of that color of the skin, because the skin is the thin as a sheet of paper. So we got to look past the skin into the heart and the and the makeup of the person.
Thank you.
But so that's it in general.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were nodding when he talked about the conversations about race that have to happen early on. We're doing a disservice to young people in our families by not having these discussions early on.
You know, black parents have to discuss with their black children what is out there. You know, it's called the talk or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've got to say, you know, it's not a world that always welcomes you. With whites, it's exactly the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about it at all. And our kids go into schools and go into a lot of different aspects of growing up, and we are not equipped to be agents of change.
Very prominent African-American businessman, one of the wealthy ones in this community, told me about his conversation with an even more powerful and influential white businessman. That when for the brief moment they did talk about race, he asked him. He said, "So, man, you know, when you're with your family and with your other white associates, what do you guys think about race?" He said, "We don't."
Mm-hmm.
He said, "We don't talk about y'all at all." Unless we have to.
Mm-hmm.
That's even bigger an insult. You're saying that's big. That's even more problematic.
Well, it could be, but it's very true that only when blacks force white people to talk about it do we, and we always blame black people for bringing up
for making me talk about it.
Yeah.
Wow, 504-260-9265. Fascinating discussion. I know we're not even going to have enough time, but you want to get this book, Deep Denial, one of the great books of our time. Line 2, T. You're on with Reverend Billings.
Oh, thank you. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Oliver, he's totally right about you have to catch this at a young age, because a while back I was in a store, and you know, Oliver, usually when you're coming out of the store, if you feel somebody behind you, you know, you automatically hold the door for the next person,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And so I held the door for the people behind me, and I just looked away, and I heard this little white girl about 6 years old, and she said thank you, and she used the N word.
Yeah.
And Oliver, I was so shocked I couldn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. And so
I'm
I
shocked
heard
for
the
you right
white
now.
man say,
Right.
"Oh no, don't say that. That's not nice." And so when I could get some words out, I said, "Mister,"
Right.
I said, "she probably heard this around the table. That's how you all talk about
Right.
us." And so I said, "Mister, this is an innocent child's mind." I said, "It is a abomination against God to put hate in an innocent child's mind like
Right.
that." So I just wanted to bring that out, Oliver.
Right.
Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, T. Yeah, that would shock you to have a 6-year-old, but only mimic the conversations that are prominent in her family.
It's child abuse.
Right.
You know, when we don't, as a society, equip all of us to deal with racism, then we're creating a future that none of us would say that we want to live. You know?
You say most importantly, institutionalized racism has been around and has affected our public policy, our laws, Jim Crow today. We heard Derwin Bunton talk about conversations with prominent attorneys and legal minds who said, would you rather deal with the criminal justice system now or in 1962? And you would be better dealing with it in 1962 if you were black than dealing with it right now. Talk about some examples of this institutionalized piece since the early 1700s. What are some examples that are real prominent in the book that you can share with our public?
Well, when this country was being formed, their greatest fear was that poor white people would join with African peoples enslaved and with Native Americans. Mm-hmm. What they were developing couldn't hold without that. So into the Constitution became certain protections. Mm-hmm. You know, we in the Institute call it affirmative action for whites, you know, and that went on for hundreds of years. As soon as affirmative action began, something impacted blacks, we said, oh, that's unfair. You know, that's the kind of, unfortunately, that's the kind of ignorance that we are prepared to live out. There are many examples. When W.B. Du Bois in the 1890s, he was getting a Ph.D. from Harvard. It would be his second Ph.D. And the faculty at Harvard, it is said, approached him and said, would you accept the degree as a white man, lest others of your race think they can achieve what you just did?
Even from Harvard.
Even from Harvard. You know, most recently, the examples of universities, particularly along the East Coast, the greatest universities of our society, it's been exposed that many of them, you know, built their endowments on money from the slave experience. Again, it's not taught, and yet we have opinions about it. Racism is something everybody has their own understanding, and if you say, well, have you studied it? No, you know, but they think they're right. You know, it's not a part of the national discussion in a helpful way. When race is brought up in this country, it usually leads to an argument or a fight. That's why in the People's Institute, we set a contract out at the very beginning and say, will you abide by this contract? Because without it, you'd lose control of the whole thing.
Reparations. You talked about, when we opened this conversation, you talked about the privileges, the white wealth that was created because of slavery, because of the oppression, because of Indian land. Reparations.
We owe them. You know, we owe black people. Now, it'll be one of the hardest things to accomplish, but reparations are desperately needed. Again, the atmosphere that such conversations create makes one real hesitant to bring up reparations. A lot of white people, maybe even most of us, we think that, you know, black people have been given, quote unquote, enough. You know, aren't you satisfied? Well, you know, reparations is something that I think this country will eventually have to adopt. But it's going to be interesting to see what form that takes.
I got to talk to you about a little politics. And, you know, knowing you, you've always had your disdain for political assistance in terms of you speaking truth to power and accountability from whoever public officials are. This national discussion we have right now, Democrats and Republicans. David Billings, your view on politics in general? Well,
the current situation is very scary. You know, it's like something we haven't said, you know, since the 1950s and 60s. The way in which Donald Trump has stoked the fires of resentment and prejudice, even saying that the whole election process is a trick, is a fraud. That's very dangerous, because you will have a lot of, I'll speak to white people who will hear this and it'll resonate with them. And so I think that we're in for some very difficult times. Let me say this about politics. This country was never supposed to have a black president.
That was my next question.
You know, and
it's post-racial society.
Post-racial society. And even though many white people, millions, would vote for President Obama both times, you wouldn't see us on the battle lines as he took hit after hit after hit from other elected officials and, you know, people who are supposed to know better. But I think that Obama's presidency is something that has scared a lot of us as to where is this all going to end? You know,
who's next?
Yeah, who's next?
What's next?
You know, so you know, politics are tough.
How can people get a copy of this book, Deep Denial?
Well, one, you can go on Amazon and buy it. Two, you can, and I wish Marjorie were here because I can't remember it all, but you can go to the publisher, who is Crandall, Dostie, and what is it? Anyway, I would recommend Amazon.
Okay, wow. Can you pick it up at the Community Book Center over on Bayou Road?
I'm sure you can, or they can order it for you.
Right. What would you tell if you could sit down with white people, if you could call that big meeting, and they would all come on race and class and the future of this world? I think. What would you say to white people?
Well, you need time, you know, and it's hard to do it in one little short bit of time. But you'd also have to. It's almost like a theological discussion.
You bring Jesus into this?
You're going to bring Jesus into it, because whites would have to agree to not react, to not lash out, to not try to put this all on black people. We become very egalitarian when race comes up. Well, everybody can be racist. No, everybody can have racial prejudice.
Right.
But you know, racism is a structural thing.
If you could sit down and talk to in a separate meeting with people of color, what would you share with them?
That the way out is to keep the organized black community, brown community, keep that alive. Put the pressure on those who you are successful in electing. Give them a base from which to operate and hold them accountable. You know. So I think you can undo racism. It was, again, as Ron says.
So even with all of the challenges, you believe it's doable?
Yeah. If it was done, it can be undone. That's what we say. You know, it's not a part of the natural order of things. You know.
Wow. So how do people get in touch with you in the People's Institute?
People's Institute, PSAB, PISAB, .org. And it's at 601 North Carrollton Street. And, you know, go on the website and check it out.
This we've talked about the nation. We've talked about your conversations with blacks and whites in politics. Your city, this city where you live, New Orleans. Glass half full? Hope for the future?
Well, you know, there's always hope for the future as long as people are alive and rooted. Culturally, spiritually, and everything else. But there's so many attacks on us as a society that it takes hard work, and it continues. I'm not, looking for a goal at the end of the rainbow. I'm saying if we work on this, and we have a plan, and we incorporate it into our institutions like education, then over time we can undo it.
Wow. If it can be done?
It can be undone.
It can be undone. Reverend David Billings, in his book, Deep Denial, The Persistence of White Supremacy in the United States, History and Life. His book, you don't want to miss out on his book. Reverend Billings, you promised to come back to the Good Morning Show?
If you ask me.
I'm going to ask you to come back. And the last thing I'm going to say is that, are you more introspective these days? Because I remember that man that wouldn't knock on the door. He would
try to kick it down.
He would try to kick it down.
Well, if you put it like that, I probably am more introspective. It's interesting as you get older.
Right.
There are things that you kind of are reluctant to do, but I still, try to do what I've always done, and
speaking truth to power,
yeah.
Fairness and justice. One of the great advocates for justice of our time, Reverend David Billings, anti-racist trainer with the People's Institute, for Survival and Beyond and Deep Denial. Get a copy of this book. I think you're going to be at Justice and Beyond tonight. Talking. People can come out and listen and share with you again. This is OT and the Early Bird. Fascinating discussion for our time and all time. We did our job to try to wake you up. The next brother is going to make sure you're conscious. The Conscious Hour with Chuck Perkins. It's Monday, and he'll be at it again.